Mark, we have to start with Morgan Gibbs-White and that potential move to Tottenham. I came off set last night basically saying it's all on track, everything looks rosy. What's gone wrong?
What's gone right, it feels like, for the last 24 hours for Tottenham Hotspur. Let's just clarify where we are as of last night, because that was the point, like you say, where things look good and this looked like this would be a smooth transaction from Nottingham Forest to Tottenham. Now, yesterday we said that Tottenham Hotspur had met the release clause, which we understand to be £60 million in Morgan Gibbs-White's contract. He was due to have his medical in London today. There were some reports suggesting he had travelled down to London, been given permission to do so because that release clause had been met. We know that he was a huge part of Nottingham Forest's successful season last year, where they finished 7th in the Premier League, 7 goals, 10 assists, huge part of Nuno's side. However, there's been a rather large spanner put into the works today, and it's all centring around this release clause.
What's gone wrong? What's happened?
Do you want to go? Shall I go? I'll tell you what, let's go to what our reporter Rob Dorset was saying earlier on today.
Okay.
And he was trying to give as much clarity as he possibly could with regards to this situation. So, Nottingham Forest consider Morgan Gibbs-White's proposed move to Tottenham off for now. Sky Sports News has been told, whilst Forest consult their lawyers over potential legal action. Sky Sports News understand Forest have ceased all communication with Tottenham. Forest also believes Spurs made an illegal approach to the player and never granted permission for them to speak to him. Forest also believe there has been a breach in confidentiality around his release clause because Tottenham's bid was pitched at exactly the level of his release clause. It's not yet clear if Forest are able to block the transfer entirely. However, it is now expected to be delayed as Forest prepare a complaint to the Premier League. Forest have refused to comment to Sky Sports News, and Tottenham Hotspur also declined to comment when contacted.
OK. So
does that make it more clear for you?
Slightly, but I'm wondering one thing, Dharmesh, because football's a small world. Everyone talks, agents, players, coaches, everyone talks, whether it's on the record, off the record, and then sometimes they talk to us as journalists as well. How can you keep something like a release clause confidential?
Depends. Actually, it's a good question because there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to release clauses. I spoke to an agent earlier on today, and he tells me it all depends on how the release clause is worded in the contract. So it's a basically individual case-by-case basis. Now, if a release clause is confidential, let's just take that case first of all, then a club, if they wanted to buy a player, would have to approach another club to find out, A, if there is a release clause, and B, the value of that release clause. It can be the case that details of a release clause can be made available to an interested club via a representative if that was what was agreed when that contract was signed with the release clause incorporated within it. But if it is confidential, then there is still a club-to-club contact that would have to be made. Loosely speaking, look, it should work as easy as if there's a release clause and a club meets that release clause, then the player can go and talk to the club if he so wishes to go and talk to that club.
Which I thought was what happened.
But given the information that we've got today, this might imply that there might have been a confidential element to this release clause. Hence why Tottenham Hotspur would have had to have approached Nottingham Forest formally to, look, we're interested in Morgan Gibbs-White. For example, I'm using this as the example. We'd be prepared to pay this much money. And it just so happens that the information that Rob Dorset was giving us today was effectively Tottenham Hotspur pitching their bid at exactly that release clause level, which is why Nottingham Forest have thought this doesn't sound entirely right, because we feel that this is confidential information that can only be gleaned from a club if there is club-to-club contact.
Right.
Some release clauses are under an NDA. So that release clause exists, but no one is allowed to know it.
NDA meaning?
Non-disclosure agreement.
Yes.
And there are some release clauses like Michael Elise at Crystal Palace, £50 million, Dean Howson at Bournemouth, £50 million, Mateus Cunha that went to Manchester United, £62.5 million. That is a public release clause. People know that, the agent's allowed to discuss that. But there are some release clauses the agent is not allowed to tell anyone. And it feels like, reading between the lines, this is one of those situations where that detail in the contract is not allowed to be told. That's written, but not said.
Okay.
And I think that's where Nottingham Forest's issue is.
And that's where they're disappointed with this approach. But I wonder whether we're just delaying the inevitable here because, OK, I can understand Nottingham Forest are a little bit upset. Perhaps a confidentiality breach has taken place. But this move is going to happen anyway, Dharmesh?
It feels like it will happen, but there is going to be a delay now, clearly, because after yesterday's news, we were expecting this to accelerate pretty quickly. As you said, you came off air and was like, right, this deal's happening. But now we've got this situation where Nottingham Forest are not happy and they want some sort of... They want it looked into how Tottenham Hotspur have approached this. It's very difficult in transfers in particular to keep... You mentioned it before, everybody talks to everybody else. So it's how certain bits of information has been transmitted to certain parties and whether it was done in good faith or whether it was done where it shouldn't have been done.
We've seen cases where teams perhaps have known what the trigger clause, the release clause is, when there necessarily hasn't been club-to-club contact, Mark, and so they've bid just a little bit higher to prove that they didn't know what the release clause was.
The famous one was Arsenal and Luis Suarez at Liverpool.
Yeah.
We understand it was anything over 40 million would have triggered the opportunity for the player to speak to the club, and Arsene Wenger very famously bid 40 million and £1, which was the release clause. So they were entitled to speak to the player. It never ended up happening. But yeah, and sometimes you have release clauses. For example, Neymar Jr., when he went from Barcelona to PSG, that had to be paid in full. So it was a cheque for 220 million euros on the table from PSG to La Liga. We are paying your release clause. Other release clauses, as Dharmesh alluded to, they can be unique to that particular deal. It could be 3 payments over 18 months of 3 equal payments. Every release clause is ever so slightly different, and it's one of those situations we try and gather as much information, but ultimately the club can do nothing if that is contractually written between the two parties. If you pay X, Y and Z in these kind of payments, in this kind of timescale, there's nothing we can do about it.
That's the case with Matheus Cunha. So Manchester United knew it was £62.5 million, but the conditions of that release clause were they pay a third of it immediately, they pay a third of it next summer, and the summer after that they complete that £62.5 million payment over 3 instalments. Now, you said before, sometimes clubs go above the release clause, and people will say, why would you pay above the release clause? Well, sometimes clubs will try and say, you know what, we're willing to pay you, say it was £62.5 million for Cunha. I was told at the time that Manchester United were not only exploring the deal as the conditions set out that Wolves had, but they were also exploring potentially paying above £62.5 million in exchange for more favourable payment terms. Because in this world of PSR, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit more later in the show, you have that situation where the £62.5 million won't come out of Manchester United's account straight away. It will be the first instalment. So if they can spread a slightly higher payment over, say, 4 instalments, then that 20-odd million pounds that they're paying at the moment, that would be reduced per year. And that would help them per financial year in their PSR calculation.
I bet you all didn't know that you were going to become experts in
I'm finally using my economics
releases.
degree. I did an economics degree, finally using it.
There you go.
Yeah. My brain is whirring. OK, that's all as it is. There's nothing we can do about that. We have to wait for the legal process to play out. But what does this mean in terms of Spurs now? So they want their player as soon as possible. They've got a pre-season tour to go on.
They might just have to be patient. Like Dharmesh said, you get the feeling this will happen. However, they may just have to wait a little bit longer to just clear up things legally and make sure they're in a comfortable position, because the last thing they want to do is be dragged through the courts throughout the course of the next few weeks and months and so on and so forth. They don't want to make it uncomfortable for the player. They just want to get the players in the building, focus on this brand new era at Tottenham Hotspur with Thomas Frank, who's an exceptional coach. I'm really excited to watch his new look Tottenham team, which obviously he wanted Morgan Gibbs-White to be a part of. So it'd be fascinating to see how it develops. But ultimately, it's out of everyone's hands, apart from the key 2 or 3 people at the table. And there'll be a lot of lawyers involved as well at this moment.
A lot of lawyers charging a lot of money.